In 2013, the world was stunned by the astonishing survival story of tugboat chef Harrison O'Keefe. O'Keefe's day began like any other, preparing meals for his colleagues on board. But as the weather turned stormy, disaster struck when the tugboat overturned and started rapidly filling with water, plummeting 30 feet to the depths of the ocean. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video with your friends. O'Keefe was found 3 days later at the bottom of the sea, and somehow miraculously he was still alive. This is the incredible true story of one man's struggle to survive against the odds and the strength of the faith that got him through it. Harrison O'Keefe did not consider himself to be anyone unusual. Hailing from Warri, Nigeria, he was simply a normal guy making an honest living. Working as a cook on a tugboat, his job was to make healthy, nutritious meals to keep his fellow crew members fed and nourished while at sea. On that fateful day in May 2013, he had no idea of the tragedy that was about to befall him and his colleagues, and the incredible, death-defying ordeal he was about to endure, which will forever change his life. O'Keefe was working on a tugboat called Jackson 4. It had set off from the coast of Nigeria and was working in the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The job of a tugboat is to tow other sea crafts across the ocean to their destination that can't maneuver over the waters on their own. In O'Keefe's case, his tugboat was one of 3 crafts set out to bring an oil rig back to land. This sounds like a pretty exciting job, but O'Keefe was focused on his role, which was to provide food and sustenance to the sailors. Far out into the deep waves of the Atlantic Ocean, it's not unusual to hit rocky waters or a bit of stormy weather. It's part and parcel of working on a boat out at sea, sometimes for many weeks. Some days you will drift along in relative ease, and at others you feel truly at the mercy of the elements. So when this particular storm hit in May 2013, O'Keefe and his crew had no idea just how much destruction it was going to wreak. That day, O'Keefe awoke in the early hours of the morning and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. It was when he was in the bathroom that it happened. Something struck the tugboat, a large wave, a gust of wind, who knows? But it was the final blow for the vessel. O'Keefe barely had time to think before the icy waters began sucking the tugboat into its depths. "It was around 5 a.m. and I was on the toilet when the vessel just started going down," he said to The Guardian. "The speed was so fast." O'Keefe couldn't see anything, but he knew that the ship was in serious trouble. "I heard people shouting," he said to the AP. "I felt the vessel going down. I heard a voice saying, 'Is this vessel sinking or what?' I was in the WC and the WC fell on my head. Things started falling on my head. My colleagues were shouting, 'God help me, God help me, God help me.'" O'Keefe tried to scramble out of the bathroom and towards his fellow crew members, but nothing could prepare him for what he would see next. O'Keefe managed to fight his way out of the bathroom but was met with a horrific sight. The force of the waves rocking the boat meant that he couldn't get to the emergency exit hatch, but he could see some of his colleagues inching closer to it. As everyone attempted to clamber their way to the exit hatch, a huge swell of water burst into and swept through the ship. O'Keefe could only watch in horror as 3 of his colleagues were sucked out into the black deep. O'Keefe spoke to Reuters of his horror at watching his friends and fellow crew members being swept out to their deaths. "As I was coming out of the toilet, it was pitch black, so we were trying to link our way out to the water tidal. Exit hatch," he said. 3 guys were in front of me and suddenly water rushed in full force. I saw the first one, the second one, the third one just washed away. I knew these guys were gone. This nightmare situation was only going to get worse. It's hard to imagine the force of the waves that were sucking this once powerful tugboat deep into the ocean. O'Keefe had no time to grieve for what he had just seen as he was thrown about the ship as it continued to plummet. He turned away from the exit hatch and was immediately swept up by another violent wave, but instead of being pulled out to sea, he was thrust down another of the ship's passageways. In the darkness, he had no idea where he was being pulled and what he would find there. Then, with a deafening crash, the staggering descent of the ship stopped as suddenly as it had started. The vessel had plummeted over 30 meters and had now hit the bottom of the seabed. O'Keefe slowly realized that he had been swept by the surging water into another toilet, near to one of the other cabins. Water continued to surge and pummel the tugboat on the outside, but the inside seemed to have stopped moving. O'Keen had no idea what was happening, but he realized one thing with astonishment. He was still breathing. O'Keen couldn't understand it. Was he really at the bottom of the ocean? What had happened? Where were his colleagues? Were they all right? Had anyone survived, or were some of them trapped like him? The tugboat had overturned completely and was now sitting upside down at the bottom of the seabed. Incredibly, O'Keen seemed to be in some sort of small air pocket, preserving a precious space where he could still breathe. But this wouldn't last for long. O'Keen could only watch in horror as water started to slowly fill the cabin. How long before he would be completely submerged? O'Keen realized that he was alive and he could still breathe in this small air pocket, but he wasn't sure what to do next. He tried calling out for his colleagues, peering into the darkness for any sign of them, but there was nothing. All around me was just black and noisy, he said to the Guardian. I was crying and calling on Jesus to rescue me. I prayed so hard. I was so hungry and thirsty and cold, and I was just praying to see some kind of light. But it wasn't just prayer and hope alone that O'Keen was relying on. Inspired by his belief in the possibility of rescue, he also realized he had to start thinking practically and do what he could to help preserve his life. Stuck in the tiny toilet, water slowly but steadily trickling in, O'Keen looked around for things to climb onto to keep his head out of the water. He found an overturned wash basin and clung to that to propel himself a little higher. But this wouldn't last. He needed to find something else to climb on, and fast. Terrifying as it was, O'Keen had to leave his tiny toilet and see if there was anything else nearby that he could use to build height. He finally built up the courage to open the door and managed to swim into the adjacent cabin. From there, he was able to pull off parts of the wall paneling. He piled up the paneling to create a sort of makeshift raft and managed to lift himself further out of the icy water. There was nothing else to do now but wait and pray for a miracle. There was another reason that O'Keen needed to stay still after building this raft. Not just because of fear of dislodging another great swell of ocean water, but to preserve the oxygen in his own body. Any form of exertion obviously causes you to breathe more heavily, and O'Keen was aware of the limited oxygen in his tiny air pocket. He stayed as still as possible and tried to regulate his breathing, taking in careful, controlled breaths. But even this wouldn't be helpful for much longer. The truth is, even if O'Keen had stayed completely still and managed to ration his breathing meticulously, eventually oxygen would become too scarce anyway. At these sorts of depths of the ocean, the oxygen levels are incredibly low and are quickly overtaken by the nitrogen levels. Experts say that this deep into the ocean, even if someone miraculously managed to avoid drowning, eventually they would succumb to nitrogen poisoning. The nitrogen would first leave them panicked and disoriented, followed by a loss of consciousness and eventually death. O'Keen did everything he could to cling to life. Lost and alone in the darkness, freezing cold, and with the water levels slowly rising, he was desperate for a sign of hope. I was there in the water in total darkness, just thinking it's the end. I kept thinking the water was going to fill up the room, but it did not, he told Reuters. I was so hungry, but mostly so thirsty. The salt water took the skin off my tongue. He had no food, no water, but he did manage to find a small bottle of Coke. But O'Keen had more to worry about than a lack of food or water. Already incredibly uncomfortable from the freezing, salty water and struggling without anything to eat or drink, something else started to affect him. After prolonged hours of submerged in the harsh salt water, O'Keen's skin started to peel off in painful flakes. Alone, suffering greatly, and with no sign of rescue, at this point, anyone else in O'Keen's position might well have given up. The answer was simple. Harrison O'Keen was a man of faith. Even though things seemed utterly hopeless, the devout Christian clung to his hope in God, praying again and again that he be saved. He also recited a passage from Psalms, which was the last text that he had received from his wife. It was clear that for O'Keen to survive, he would truly need some kind of miracle. Fortunately, this was something that he believed was completely possible, even in the darkest of times. Harrison O'Keen's incredible survival story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of faith. Trapped for an astonishing 60 hours at the bottom of the ocean, he clung to life with unwavering determination and thoughts of his family back home. It was these thoughts that gave him the strength to continue fighting, holding on to the belief that rescue was possible. O'Keen's thoughts frequently turned to his wife, Akpovana, whom he had married just 5 years earlier, and the child they had hoped to have together. In the darkest moments, he also found solace in reflecting on the blessings he had received throughout his life. The pivotal moment in O'Keen's ordeal came when he heard a faint hammering on the vessel's deck. At first, he questioned whether it was real or a figment of his imagination, given the extreme depth at which he was trapped, but he couldn't afford to dismiss it. He took action, swimming down to find a water dispenser and using it to create noise by hammering the side of the vessel, hoping that someone might hear him. Unbeknownst to O'Keen, there was indeed a search team of divers circling the wreck, though their mission was to recover bodies, not to find survivors. The divers had already located 4 bodies from the wreckage, and they were not expecting to hear any signs of life. Yet, against all odds, the divers heard the faint tapping and decided to investigate further. The shock and surprise they experienced as they realized there was someone alive inside can only be imagined. They cautiously approached O'Keen, who was too weak to attract their attention initially. O'Keen's desperate attempt to get the diver's attention involved tapping him on the back of the neck. When the diver turned and saw him, it was a moment of disbelief turned to amazement. The diver reported to the rescue ship above, initially mistaking O'Keen for a corpse. But when O'Keen's hand touched the diver's, it was clear he was alive, and the rescue team's emotions shifted from fear to joy. They carefully communicated with O'Keen to keep him calm, aware that sudden excitement could be dangerous due to the nitrogen levels he had absorbed during his ordeal. The rescue process involved multiple stages to address the risks associated with O'Keen's condition. Despite his miraculous survival, his heart had become filled with gas, making it unable to handle the atmospheric conditions above the water. The rescue team had to carefully manage his return to the surface, using diving equipment, a diving bell, and a decompression chamber to gradually normalize his heart function. News of Harrison O'Keen's extraordinary survival quickly spread worldwide, leaving people astonished and inspired. Many wondered how he had managed to endure such a harrowing experience. Some speculated that the chemical composition of the water in the air pocket may have played a role in his survival by helping to mitigate dangerous gas levels. Additionally, O'Keen's unique circumstances of being in the bathroom at the time of the accident, while others were locked in their cabins, likely contributed to his survival. This twist of fate kept him from being swept away with his fellow crew members. Throughout his recovery, O'Keen remained humble and selfless. He mourned the loss of his colleagues who did not survive, shedding tears for them even as he celebrated his own miraculous rescue. His deep faith in God sustained him during the darkest hours, and he made a pact with the divine to never return to the sea in exchange for his rescue. Today, Harrison O'Keen is a healthy and grateful man who continues to work as a cook. He has kept his promise to never set foot on the water again, cherishing the second chance at life he received. Although haunted by memories of those fateful days, he looks forward to the future with hope and resilience, a living testament to the power of faith in the human spirit.